Instead, we have the opportunity to make a habit of empathy, to recognize ourselves in each other.
The fault lies deeper than just the inability to come to an agreement on new mechanisms to regulate a global economy. The fault lies deeper than the inability to come to some kind of an accord on binding carbon targets. The fault lies with world leaders who are using 18th century ideas about human nature and the human journey, born in the Enlightenment at the dawn of the market era, nation-state era, to address 21st century biosphere challenges. It's a disconnect. For 1,500 years in Western civilization, the church worldview about human nature prevailed. The church said, every little baby is born depraved, born in sin. If you want salvation, you have to wait for Christ and the world to come. 1,500 years. At the dawn of the market economy era and the new governing unit called the nation state, our Enlightenment philosophers began to challenge that worldview. John Locke, the great political philosopher of the Enlightenment, he said, the little babies are not born in sin. They're born tabula rasa, blank slate. Except he left a teeny opening. It's a blank slate, he said, except there is a proclivity and a predisposition to acquire property. He left a little hole open. I don't know why no one's caught him on this. It was a sneaky little thing. Blank slate, but that little baby is a blank slate, but that little baby really wants to be productive, negate nature, take the waste in the commons, and create acquisition of property. And the negation of nature is the journey to happiness. Adam Smith, the great Scottish economist of the Enlightenment, said that every little baby is born as an autonomous agent. And the basic drive is to pursue his or her individual material self-interest in an unbridled competitive market. In the 19th century, post-Enlightenment philosophers, Jeremy Bentham said, no, little babies are actually born to seek pleasure over pain. The basic drive is utilitarian to the core. And you can go to the University of Chicago and still see that ideology at place in the business school. Charles Darwin, the great naturalist of the 19th century, suggested that every creature is born with a drive to perpetuate their survival and reproduce themselves. Finally, Sigmund Freud, at the end of the 19th century, suggested that actually every little baby is born with an insatiable sexual desire, and they need to extinguish their libido. My friends, please. How many parents and grandparents do we have here? Now, that little baby in your arms, is that baby born depraved and in sin? Is that little baby born as a detached, rational, calculating agent? An autonomous being pursuing their individual self-interest, their utility, their pleasure, and their satiating libido? Is this what our babies are? We laugh. But this is what we've all come to believe for 2 centuries. If this is who we really are, human beings are detached, rational, calculating, depraved, utilitarian, materialistic, self-interested, pleasure-seeking, libido-driven, or to quote one of the great sages of the late 20th century, material girl, material world. If this is who we are, really what our nature is, we're likely doomed as a species. We are doomed. I don't see any likely scenario on the horizon in which we can bring together 6.8 billion human beings and create a very integrated, just, sustainable, complex global economy, and we heal this planet and steward the biosphere if we have 6.8 billion cowboys each pursuing their individual, utilitarian, materialist, libido-driven self-interest. Do you? But this isn't so funny because our parenting styles, our educational models, our business models, our institutional way of life, our governance, our geopolitical foreign policy is all based on those ideas. That's why we didn't understand the collapse of the Second Industrial Revolution in July 2008, and that's why in Copenhagen, everybody was fighting each other. In the last 10 years, there's been a set of breathtaking breakthroughs in science. below the radar screen. Evolutionary biology, neurocognitive science, child development, and other fields. These breakthroughs are suggesting that we got it wrong. They are forcing us to rethink our basic concepts about human nature, and the implications are enormous and far-reaching. I want to take you back to the early 1990s, and just a little teeny laboratory in Parma, Italy. Nothing going on in this place. And they were studying a macaque monkey. They had an MRI scanning machine on the brain of the monkey, and they were noting how the monkey responded when the monkey was trying to open up a nut, and certain neurons lit up in the brain. End of experiment. By sheer serendipity, about a minute after this experiment, a human being, a trainer, walked into the lab, saw the nuts, and said he wanted to eat a nut, and tried to open up the nut. The macaque didn't move, simply gazed at this human being, watched him eating the nut, and then the same neurons lit up in the monkey watching the human being open the nut as when the monkey was opening it up himself. They were flabbergasted, totally shocked. They had no idea what this was. They started to put MRI scanning machines on other primates with big neocortexes, our chimpanzee friends and relatives. Then they went to human beings, and over again, they saw this phenomena appear on the scanning machines. If someone had a personal experience of pain or pleasure or disgust or rejection or any other kind of human feeling, they would record the neurons. If then someone observed another person with the same feelings, disgust or rejection or pleasure or pain or joy or anger, the same neurons would light up in the observer as when it happened to them. But is this so hard to understand? How many times in life when you see somebody, for example, puncture themselves, a little blood comes out, you wince? Spider goes up someone's arm, you kind of feel the creepy, crawly spider yourself, correct? This is only one part of the new discoveries, mirror neurons, the so-called empathy neurons. But what we're finding as we dig deep into those species that have advanced neocortexes, we're seeing a whole new idea of the evolution of nature, and we're seeing on the more complex social species that we are wired for empathic distress. We are actually wired and predisposed at the get-go at birth to be homo empathicus. We're not wired to be autonomous and independent agents and self-serving, utilitarian, materialistic. We're not wired that way. What we're wired for is empathy, and if those basic drives are repressed, denied, or if society doesn't nurture them, the secondary drives come in with a vengeance. How is it that we can explain what happened after the Haiti disaster if we rely on the old 18th century Enlightenment ideas about human nature? Within minutes of this happening, as the first Twitters came out and YouTube, the entire human race responded en masse with an empathic embrace. If we are truly depraved, evil, utilitarian, self-interested, materialistic, how do we account for that response? That was our real nature. We are a social animal. Social animals nurse their young. Social animals are wired to be social. If we are homo empathicus, and we have a predisposition for empathic distress that can be nurtured and can evolve, is it possible to imagine stretching that empathic sensibility so we become empathic to the entire human race as a species, extended family, and to all of our fellow creatures living on the earth? Is that possible to imagine? Now you're probably saying to me, maybe not in this audience, but in other places, oh my God, I came out to listen to this. Please. We can't even pass a health care reform bill. We've got 5 cockamamie justices on the Supreme Court who just said it's an invasion of one's freedom and their rights to deny them the ability to spend any amount of money they want to buy the elections and buy the United States Congress. Right. And this man's up here talking to me about biosphere consciousness and an empathic embrace of the human race. Well, look, consciousness does change over history. The way our mind works today, the way we comprehend temporal and spatial relationships, the wiring of our brain, completely different than a medieval serf in the 10th century. And a medieval serf in the 10th century, their brain is completely different in the way it comprehends reality as a forager hunter might be 30,000 years ago.